This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles starting at just $2.99 a month. More on them in a bit. On November 1st, 1907, the New Orleans Police Department arrested 47 members of a violent and mysterious organization responsible for dozens of murders. It appeared to be a cult dedicated to a previously unknown deity. Upon interrogation, a Cuban member of the sect revealed that the center of their cult lay amid the pathless deserts of Arabia, where Iram, the city of pillars, dreams hidden and untouched. Keen listeners may know that the quote comes from a piece of fiction, The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. The city of Iram, however, may not be fiction after all. It never headquartered a deadly cult, mind you, but the mysteries surrounding it have puzzled generations of scholars and explorers. Since biblical times, religious texts, ancient geographies, poetry, literature, and oral tradition have all mentioned a rich, beautiful, and powerful city towering amongst the sands of the Arabian desert. Some stories describe it as thriving and powerful, while others focus on its destruction, on how the mighty city had disappeared almost overnight, swallowed by the pitiless dunes. Some stories call the city Iram of the Pillars. Others have christened it Ubar or Wabar. T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, had dreamt about finding the legendary lost city, a dream that remains unfulfilled due to his untimely death. It was he who gave it the title Atlantis of the Sands. Lawrence of Arabia had estimated that Iram was located in the area called Ar-Rimal by local Bedouins. This is better known as Rab al-Khali, or the Empty Quarter. The Empty Quarter occupies parts of southern Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates, covering a surface of 660,000 square kilometers. This desert is the largest area of continuous sand in the world and one of the driest regions on the planet. The average annual rainfall is only 35 millimeters. That's 65 millimeters less than the Sahara Desert and only 20 millimeters more than the Atacama Desert, the driest place on Earth. Unsurprisingly, the Rab al-Khali is almost completely uninhabited and largely unexplored. Could an environment so inadequate to human life sustain an ancient, thriving city, though? Well, yes. Geological evidence suggests that the vast sand desert was once a rather fertile land. During the late Pleistocene era, that's from 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago, water buffaloes and hippos happily roamed the area. Later, during the Arabian Neolithic period, from 8,000 to 4,400 BC, the Empty Quarter experienced another moist moment referred to as the Holocene climactic optimum. The climate in southern Arabia became progressively drier in the following millennia. During the late Iron Age, from 1000 to 550 BC, the desertification process was man-made. It appears that the expansion of agriculture and animal farming in the period removed the cover of vegetation from the top of these vast sandy hills. The destabilization of these dunes led to the displacement of sand aided by strong winds, which eventually covered most of the area. So, is that it then? By the 6th century BCE, the quarter had indeed been emptied. Well, not really, not entirely. Archaeological evidence proves that the Rab al-Khali retained a large number of oases providing water and food, around which many settlements were clustered in the era. And if we look at ancient historical accounts, we may find these settlements were rather rich and sophisticated. Let's go back to the 7th century BCE, when the Assyrians recorded their dealings with Arabia. Located in ancient Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Empire knew Arabia as a wealthy land, made rich by the trades of perfumes and spices. It was rich enough to justify the campaigns of kings Esarhaddon and Assurbanipal, who subjugated the region between 680 and 627 BCE. A more direct reference to the people of the Empty Quarter comes from Greek geographer and historian Herodotus. In approximately 430 BCE, Herodotus described Arabia in general, and its southern lands in particular, as a global powerhouse in the production and trade of spices. Arabia is the only country which produces frankincense, myrrh, cassia, cinnamon, and laudanum. The whole country is scented with them and exhales an odour marvellously sweet. Herodotus does reference a desert, but also that it is crossed by a river, river, the Chores, which flows into the Ethiopian Sea, or the southern half of the Red Sea. Moreover, Arabian kings had devised an ingenious irrigation system using pipes made of oxen skins. More than 4 centuries later, another Greek author, the geographer Strabo, confirmed that southern Arabia was still rich and fertile. He described the country of the Sabians, modern-day Yemen, as the most fertile of all, providing the spices already noted by Herodotus, as well as balsamum, sweet-smelling palms, and calamus. The Sabians were not mere producers, but also traders, carrying their goods as far as Syria and Mesopotamia. By trading these spices, the Sabians had become the richest of all the Arabian tribes. Strabo reports that the doors, walls, and roofs of their houses were variegated with inlaid ivory, gold, silver, and precious stones. The Sabians are also mentioned in the Bible, by the way. More precisely, the Book of Kings tells the story of the Queen of Saba, or Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon with a caravan of spices and gold as a gift. The Bible also makes several references to the lands of Ophir or Uphaz. These biblical passages hint at a prosperous land from which caravans or shipments of gold, precious stones, and sandalwood reach Palestine. Ophir is believed by biblical scholars to be located in southern Arabia. All these sources lead us to believe that the empty quarter may have not been that empty and barren after all. On the contrary, the area encompassing modern-day Yemen and Oman may have been one of the richest in the region. But so far, we've talked about quite a wide expanse of land. Let's not forget, we're looking for a city. Where can we find the first reference to the Atlantis of the Sands? The first mention of the city, which may have been the fabled Iram, comes from a map of 150 CE. The map was compiled by Claudius Ptolemy, a 2nd century mathematician, astronomer, and geographer from Alexandria in Egypt. Ptolemy indicated a place he called Amanum Emporium, or the Amani Marketplace, located in the middle of what is today the Rub al-Khali. Based on its location, its name suggesting trade, and previous descriptions of southern Arabia, scholars have speculated that the Emporium was a commercial outpost at the intersection of bustling trade routes. More likely, this was a gateway and resting stop for traders of frankincense. This was one of the most sought-after goods in the Roman Empire, as it was the source material for the incense constantly burning in pagan shrines. Most of all, it was a commodity that could be procured in great quantity only from the southern regions of the Arabian Peninsula. More precisely, from the Dhofar Mountains, also known as the Al-Khara Range in modern-day Oman. Traders brought their caravans of spices into the Amanum Emporium, bought supplies, sold some of their own merchandise, and perhaps enjoyed some of the city's attractions. It is likely that city authorities provided shelter and refreshment for these merchants while encouraging side trade deals among them. Deals on which they exacted taxes or custom tolls, all contributing to the upkeep of the town. It sounds a bit prosaic, but Iram, this mythical Atlantis of the Sands, may well have started its existence as a sort of glorified service station. Sometimes after Ptolemy included this emporium in his map, mentions of this location disappear from historical records for centuries. What could have been its fate, and what of the rich and powerful nations that thrived in the not-so-empty quarter? The next clue in our treasure hunt comes from pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. It is a single verse by poet Ufnun al-Taghalibi, who lived in the second half of the 6th century CE. If I had been of the race of Ad and Iram, brought up among them, and of Luqam and Jaden. The verse is interpreted as al-Taghalibi lamenting the fact that he does not belong to any of these tribes, and it confirms that Iram indicated the name of a place or of a people originating from a place. The next and perhaps best known mention of Iram comes from the Quran, written between 609 and 632. In chapter 89, verses 6 to 14, the reader is invited to consider how the Lord dealt with the tribe or people of Ad and their city of Iram, with lofty pillars, the like of which were not produced in the land. Different translations may slightly differ, but the meaning is consistent. The chapter tells of how the tribe of Ad, the Thamud people, and the pharaohs all transgressed beyond bounds in the lands, and heaped therein mischief on mischief. Therefore did thy Lord pour on them a scourge of diverse chastisements, for thy Lord is a guardian on a watchtower. The Thamuds are also quoted in chapter 7, verse 78. They are described as an arrogant nation who rejected the teachings of the monotheistic prophet Salih. As a result, they were annihilated by an earthquake. The people of Ad are frequently mentioned in the Quran as a tribe living in southern Arabia, so an area consistent with the early account of spice-rich nations in the Amanum Emporium. Their fate is mentioned in chapter 11, verse 60. They are described as victims of a curse to last until their day of judgment. Their guilt was, again, to reject the word of a monotheistic prophet, in this case, the prophet Hud. The story of Iram, as portrayed in the Quran, could be interpreted as a parable. How the rejection of the one true God may bring about the destruction of entire civilizations. This story would then be similar to the one of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible. But the clues can also be interpreted in a more literal way. There may have been a city called Iram, which could have served as the capital of the Ad, or at least a very important commercial center in their kingdom. The city was adorned with many pillars, the highest in the region, a sign of wealth and power. Then, sometime before the writing of the Quran, 609 to 632 CE, Iram suffered a catastrophic end. Now we're going to hear more about potential civilization-ending disasters in just a moment, but first, let me thank our sponsor, CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles for some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. Now, if you're enjoying this one, why not try out CuriosityStream for free and check out all of their fascinating history and geography series. We've touched a bit here on the Omani lands in this video, and they have a two-part series called Magical Oman, or maybe there's a longer series like the Silk Road or Empire that might take your interest. CuriosityStream is available on many platforms: web app, Roku, Android, Xbox One. The list really does go on. If you've got a screen, you could probably watch CuriosityStream on it. If you sign up between November the 16th and January the 3rd, you can get 25% off a yearly subscription. That's unlimited access for only $14.99 a year, so use the code GEOGRAPHICS when you sign up and get 25% off your yearly subscription. It's a great way to support this show, and it keeps us making more videos. It's honestly pretty good match, so check it out. There is a link below, and let's get back to it. Iran could have been ended by a sudden cataclysm like an earthquake. Another work of poetry supports this theory. Sometime between 622 and 661 CE, the poet Labid mentions the Atlantis of the sands in one of his verses. Iram and Ad tasted his punishment, and Thamud did so later. This sounds like the Thamuds and the people of Iram suffered the same fate, and the Quran states that the Thamuds were stricken by an earthquake. However, it is not clear if Labid was writing on the back of other sources or simply retelling the Quranic verses. The ultimate fate of Iram would remain a mystery for centuries, but the doomed city continued to attract the attention of travelers and writers appearing in Islamic religious scripture, poetry, and literature. The city is mentioned again in Hadith, for example. The Hadith are the sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad passed down via chains of narrators. One of the Hadiths features a story retold by the learned scholar Clapp al-Ubar, a Yemeni Jew who had converted to Islam in the 7th century. Al-Ubar's narrative tells of how a man called Abdullah lost his camel in the Yemeni desert. While looking for it, he stumbled upon the lost city of Iram, a marvel built in gold, silver, and gems, ruled by the multi-centenarian king Shahad of the Ad tribe. It is worth noting how this story emphasizes the status of Iram as a lost mythical city, but it does not mention its destruction. In the 11th century, this story was adapted into one of the most famous tales of the Arabian Nights, also known as the 1001 Nights. This is a collection of traditional folk tales of Arab, Indian, and Persian origins, some of whom may have been founded on at least a kernel of truth. Al-Ubar's tale was adapted as The City of Many-Columned Iram, one of 3 stories perpetuating the legend of the lost city of the Ad. In the history of Garib and his brother Ajib, the protagonist meets a 340-year-old man living in a cave. We learn that this old man survived both catastrophes that wiped out the Ad and the Thamud due to his embracing of monotheism. The last story worth mentioning is the Saif al-Muluk and Badiat al-Jamal. The hero Saif falls in love with a portrait of the beautiful Badiat, princess of the jinns. These are supernatural creatures of Islamic folklore. After surviving a series of dangerous adventures, Saif finally finds Badiat, and the two go on to live happily ever after in the Garden of Iran. You may have noticed that some stories refer to Iram as a heavenly place, not a doomed city. There is, in fact, another set of folk stories, mainly post-Quranic, which merge these two aspects together. According to this lore, King Shahad of the Ad tribe had built Iram as an imitation of heaven on earth. It was this hubristic project which brought destruction upon him, his people, and his city. The former inhabitants of Iram were then turned into jinns, or nisnas, strange creatures with only one eye, one arm, and one leg. It was these mentions of Iram as a lost city of delights which kept its spirit alive and enticed the imagination of travelers and treasure hunters for centuries to come. The great Moroccan explorer and scholar Mohammed ibn Battuta traveled from Spain to China over a period of 30 years in the mid-14th century. In 1329, he visited the shores of Oman and wrote that half a day's journey east of Mansura is the abode of the Adites. By Adites, he meant the people of Ad, and by their abode, he may have intended Iran. Mansura, modern-day Salaha, was in fact located on the Omani coast just south of the Dhofar Mountains, the main center for frankincense production. Then it was perfectly plausible for Iran, a trading hub for spices, to be located near Mansura. Interest in finding the lost city of Iran flourished again during the early decades of the 20th century, especially among British explorers. One of them was the Arabist and civil servant Harry St. John Philby. During World War I, he was appointed political officer of the Mesopotamian Expeditionary Force. As such, he was dispatched in 1917 on a diplomatic mission to meet Prince Abd al-Aziz of the House of Saud. Philby took the occasion to explore the Arabian deserts and so dared to brave the al-Khali. He reported spotting the ruins of an ancient building near the Aflaj oasis on the northern edge of the empty quarter. His Bedouin guides told him that the building was called Palace of Ad. Was that Iram, or Ubar as the Bedouins referred to it? Philby decided that it could not be, as the structure appeared to have been built after the 11th century. The guide, in fact, told him that Ubar, capital city of Ad, was located far to the south across the Rub al-Khali near the frontier of Yemen's Hadramaut region. But Philby did not find any ruins in his subsequent travels. In 1930, the empty quarter was explored by British diplomat Bertram Sidney Thomas, who in that period was serving as finance minister to the Sultan of Muscat and Oman. Actually, he was the first European traveller to cross the Rub al-Khali from east to west. Just like Philby, Thomas could rely on local Bedouin guides. They told him that Ubar lay buried beneath the sands in the northwestern corner of the Dhofar area. One of the guides described it as a great city that existed of old, a city rich in treasure, with date gardens and a fort of red silver. The Bedouins even told him about a path that would lead to Ubar, located about where the borders of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Oman converged. Thomas was able to locate the track on a map, but was never able to follow through on that exploration. It would take more than 50 years for another expedition to complete Thomas's work. The final and most successful expedition to the Lost City was conceived in 1981 by Nicholas Clapp, a Los Angeles filmmaker and adventurer. When filming a documentary about the Orexes of Oman, a type of local gazelle, he learned about Iran and became obsessed with finding it. As a first step, he contacted the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, operated by the California Institute of Technology for NASA. And now you're probably wondering, well, what on earth does that have to do with archaeology? Doctors Alashi, Blom, and Crippen wondered the same thing, believing Clapp to be a crank caller. But the filmmaker had a brilliant idea, using space imagery to locate ancient ruins buried in the desert. The JPL, in cooperation with other satellite systems, did not capture images of any ruin, but was able to map a network of caravan trails. These were in an area not far from the path mapped by Bertram Thomas, and they all converged on the small settlement of Ash-Shisar. Shisar indeed featured some ruins, but they were too recent to be those of Iran. Clapp decided to investigate nonetheless, and he assembled a crack team of experts, as good adventure law dictates. The first man of action, the adventurer. This was Sir Randolph Fiennes, former British Army officer and explorer of legendary status. Fiennes had previously served as military advisor to the Sultan of Oman, fighting a Soviet-backed insurgency. During his years in service, he also had learned about Iran and had unsuccessfully tried to locate it. Thanks to his connections in the Sultanate, Fiennes helped to secure financing and supplies for the expedition. Then the brains. Clapp enlisted some experts in the fields of archival research and Arabian archaeology. These were Alan Judson, curator of rare books at Huntington Library in San Marino, California, and Professor Zarins from Southwest Missouri State University. The first ground reconnaissance of Clapp's team, conducted in the summer of 1990, uncovered some promising artifacts along the tracks photographed from space. They confirmed that this trail had been a part of the frankincense trade route in the pre-Islamic era. In November of 1991, a much larger team returned to the area and began excavating at Shisar. This time, Clapp and friends claimed victory. After weeks of digging under Zarin's direction, the excavators found the ruins of a large settlement. It was octagonal in shape, enclosed by high walls with 8 identifiable towers. Each of them was at least 30 feet high, with interior rooms and nicely plastered facades. A regular array of stone struts was found to stick out from the walls. These may have been the anchor points for the tented market stalls where frankincense traders flogged their goods. A gate on one of the walls led to the inner sanctum, a large enclosed area believed to be the oldest part of the city. Professor Zarins estimated that these remains predated every other known site in southern Arabia associated with the frankincense trade. He said, "I would say they go back to at least 1000 BC. But the objects found within the ruins were even older. Zarins catalogued Roman, Greek, and Syrian pottery, the latter dating back more than 4,000 years. According to the research team, the site would have been one of the last, if not the last, trading station for the frankincense caravans traveling north from the Dhofar range and onto Mesopotamia. Finally, the archaeologists discovered evidence of a cataclysmic event, the collapse of an underground limestone cavity beneath the city. This disaster had effectively vacated the city and effected its ruin, causing its inhabitants to relocate. They estimate that the collapse happened sometime around the 2nd or 3rd century CE. This catastrophe was followed in the 4th century by a general decline of the frankincense industry. When the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, the demand for incense to be burned in pagan temples dropped off significantly. The once mighty kingdoms of southern Arabia, who had relied on that single source of income for centuries, gradually lost their importance. So, well, there you have it. Clapp and friends had found a once rich and bustling city, maybe not as rich and not as mighty as portrayed in legends, but one that had disappeared almost overnight and was doomed never to be rebuilt. It even had the 8 towers, which may become lofty pillars with the help of some poetic license. Had Clapp, Fiennes, and Zarins found Iram or Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands? Well, maybe. Clapp and Fiennes were staunchly convicted that, yes, they had. But some Islamic scholars dispute Iram's general existence. According to interpretations, Iram may simply be identified with a tribe within the Ad people. The lofty pillars may refer to large tent poles hinting at a nomadic way of life. It could even be nothing more than an indication that the Iram tribe or the Ad as a whole were tall and powerfully built, like pillars. Other archaeologists and historians, such as Jordanian Fawzi Zayadeen, suggest that the actual location may have been in Wadi Rum, southern Jordan. Professor Zarins himself was not convinced that they had found Iram. He realized the importance of their findings nonetheless in shedding light on the ancient trade routes in southern Arabia. After the Shisar expedition, he set out to find another location mapped by Ptolemy, a fortified trading center called Saqqara Metropolis, somewhere on the Indian Ocean coast of Oman. In April of 1992, he announced his discovery, a new site called Ain Humran, located at the base of the Dhofar or al-Khali range. This appeared indeed to be Saqqara, the last stop for pre-Islamic traders before setting sail to India. In conclusion, depending on which interpretation you choose to believe, you may reach the conclusion that a city called Iram may have never existed after all. And if it did exist, was it located in southern Arabia or somewhere else entirely? But I have another question. Does it really matter? The stories about Iram, Ubar, and the Amanum Emporium may have been just that. Stories. Fiction. The whole concept of an Atlantis of the sands may just be an illusion, a mirage born out of a religious parable interpreted too literally, forced upon an imprecise map. Its importance, however, is that it inspired artists across the centuries, from the poets of Arabia to horror writers in New England. It prompted courageous and resourceful travelers to explore an area believed to be one of the most lifeless and barren on Earth. And it ultimately led to the discovery of 2 ancient towns, which helped to write with precision the past of southern Arabia, the spice and frankincense trade, alongside the economy and culture linked to it. The Atlantis may have succumbed to the sands of the desert, but it sailed unscathed through the sands of time. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. Please do check out our fantastic sponsor, CuriosityStream, linked to below. And thank you for watching.